Hey listeners, this week on Divorce and Beyond, I'm going to be sharing another of our top episodes of all time from the archive. And this episode, for those who are facing divorce with children involved, this is one of the most helpful episodes out there that we've ever done, as my friend and colleague, top attorney Eric Broder and I break down the essentials that you need to know about child support. Now, one note, since this is an archive episode, some of the links may be a bit out of date, but you can find whatever you need on the website at divorceandbeyondpod.com, or just send us an email at divorceandbeyondpod@gmail.com, and we'll try to help you out. So thanks for listening in, and let's get on with the episode.
Coming up on today's episode of the Divorce and Beyond podcast.
So the main purposes of child support is really to provide food, shelter, transportation, pay part of the cable bill, the electric bill, clothing, those type of items, basic entertainment for a child. And I think people think that it includes a lot more. So what it doesn't include is someone's portion of private school tuition, extra, curricular activities. So I try to separate out what it actually includes and what the intention is versus what the quote extras are and what those mean.
Hello, and welcome to the Divorce and Beyond podcast. I'm Susan Guthrie, your host. As a top divorce attorney and family law mediator for 30 years, I know what you need to know to get through your divorce, and most importantly, how to move beyond it to thrive and transition to your new future. My experts and I are here to give you the insider view into the process, so listen in for the wisdom and expert information you need on your journey through divorce and beyond. Hello, and welcome to today's podcast. I'm Susan Guthrie, your host, and today we're joined again by attorney Eric Broder. You all remember Eric. He is one of my friends and colleagues from Connecticut, and he has been with us twice before. Eric was his first time guest spot was the hugely popular episode. I think everybody in the world has clicked on thinking about divorce, your top 5 FAQs answered. And then Eric also joined us for the special compilation double episode of most memorable cases. And he had a definitely memorable case. So go back and listen to both of those. But again, Eric is joining us from Connecticut. Little background, he is a family law attorney. He is the co-founder of Connecticut's premier matrimonial boutique firm. They're located in Westport and Greenwich now, right,
Yes.
Eric?
Correct.
Yep.
Yep.
And it's called Broder, Orland, Murray, and DeMatti. I know Broder, I know Orland, I know Murray, and I know DeMatti. They're all fantastic, as are the rest of the attorneys there. In fact, this is my favorite firm to refer cases to, as I always say. But Eric, let me just say thank you so much for joining me again today.
Thank you for having me. It's always fun. I look forward to this. So thank you, Susan.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I said to someone the other day, being a divorce attorney isn't necessarily a fun job, right?
No.
Fun isn't the word that we get to say, but being
That's
on a
true.
podcast, having a podcast, one of the reasons I like to do it is it's fun and it's really helpful.
And we go way back. I remember being adversaries. That's how long ago. A fun adversary to have, a good one to have. A straight,
Yes.
an honest person. It made life pretty easy. Started settling cases and podcasting, so we lost it.
Exactly. And it's funny because don't you remember those days when you'd go to court and you'd be in the hallway with your client who's, all geared up for litigation, and you'd be there with yours. And then the two of us would be like, hey, Eric, how are the kids? How's the wife? What's going on? And the clients are like, wait a minute.
We should hate each other. No.
No, guess what, folks? Most of us like each other.
That's right.
And Eric is definitely in that category. And that's one of the reasons why I asked him to come back on. We talked a little bit about the fact that he was coming back on in the Memorable Cases episode, because Eric's coming back to do one of those like really basic divorce topic episodes that you all are always asking questions about. And we're really going to do like the ultimate primer on child support here today, because this is something that is confusing for people, which there's a good reason for that. It's not something that you deal with every day in your lives. And so I asked Eric to come on and basically talk to you all like he might talk to a prospective client or to one of his clients. So just a little insider, golden nugget here for you all. You're basically getting a very expensive divorce attorney. It's not divorce advice. It's not divorce advice, but Eric's going to be able to give you that, that every attorney has a way of explaining things to clients. And that's what, I think Eric does especially well when he's talking to clients, when he's been counsel in mediations that I've been a part of. And so we're going to do a little bit of that today as we talk about child support.
Yes.
So, let's just start with, say you are sitting in your office like you are now, for those who are sitting or watching this on the YouTube channel, or in your conference room or on a Zoom, as you might meet with clients these days. And you're talking to your client for the first time about child support, bringing up the topic. How do you set the table? How do you tell them about it?
The first thing I do is I talk about what it includes. There's a big misunderstanding of what the recipient of child support has to use those funds for. So really the sole purpose or the main purposes of child support is really to provide food, shelter, transportation, pay part of the cable bill, the electric bill, clothing, those type of items, basic entertainment for a child. And I think people think that it includes a lot more. So what it doesn't include is someone's portion of private school tuition, extra, curricular activities, be it, ballet, soccer, the trumpet, whatever it may be, unreimbursed medical expenses, braces, co-pays even, those types of things. So I try to separate out what it actually includes and what the intention is versus what the quote extras are and what those mean. Now, in every state, different states have different rules, and I'll kind of touch on Connecticut throughout this versus maybe New York, because even though physically I'm, 10, 15 minutes from the border, I can tell you that the laws are dramatically different on child support. So it's illustrative for other different people in different states to hear about it. So always check state to state with an attorney there. I'll give a lot of the overview and basics, but there are some specifics. But the first thing I do is I talk about what it's intended to include. So if you want to feed your child the most organic, expensive food and buy, crappy clothes, so be it. It's up to you to determine how to spend that money.
Well, and that's a really good point that you're making there. And I know this is something that actually causes sometimes some conflict between co-parents, right? Because one parent is paying child support to the other parent, and that parent then pretty much gets to spend the money as they see fit, right? They don't have to give an accounting of where every penny goes. And that's hard.
Yeah, definitely it is. And there's a lot of accusatory remarks we get. She's not spending it on this, or he's not spending it on that. And why do I have, I buy all the clothes and then my spouse doesn't return the clothes. And you get a lot of that. We hear that all the time. I keep buying socks and underwear, and you're better off buying more socks and underwear than calling your lawyer about it necessarily. But those are things we get, a lot of calls about. But what's really important to know is the extracurricular activities. People think initially they're going to have to pay for that. And when they hear they don't have to pay for those items, they sort of get a relief that they're not covering travel across, for example, from those items. So I always tell people to think about and to budget properly. I mean, you can utilize that money. No one's going to say, oh, you have to account for what if there's 3 kids and you're at home, 75% of the electric bill or the cable bill, you don't have to pay it that way.
Yes.
Right, it's all commingled. It's all in the pot. We just think that this is enough money for your children. And I can tell you in the state of Connecticut, and like many states, we have state-driven guidelines. So whether you live in the nicest, and I'll talk about the amount right now a little bit, the nicest part of the state, the guidelines apply the same way there as they do in the most poor rural type areas in Connecticut. And in a lot of other states as well. There is no deviation criteria because you live in a town like Darien or Greenwich or Westport down here. versus living in some other towns. But what's interesting is the way the amount is determined is a few things. We have a chart in Connecticut, and you plug the numbers in, and it spits out how much child support would be based on your income, your spouse's income, and the number of children you have. And that sounds great, pretty easy. Oh, we have 3 kids, and we go and we look at the line and go to the bottom, and that's it. We get a number, right? That covers in Connecticut, the guidelines count up to $200,000 a year in combined net income. Now, for a lot of people, that certainly more than covers it, and the number is what the number is. But for other families, it doesn't. And then there's some extrapolation formula that the courts have the right to put into place. So it gets a little more negotiated once those numbers get higher. Other states like New York do straight percentages. I believe, if I'm correct, it's 17% of net income if you have 1 child, 25% if you have 2 children, and then it works its way up. But if you have multiple children, it doesn't decrease percentage-wise. So in Connecticut, if someone's getting $3,000 a month child support with 3 children, when a child ages out, which I'll touch on in a minute, it doesn't reduce to $2,000 and then reduce to $1,000. So it does reduce, but it doesn't reduce as substantially because you still have to cover that house. You still have to pay for the electric bill doesn't change much whether there's 2 or 3 kids in the house, right? The food might go down a little bit, but a lot of the other expenses stay. The mortgage or the rent stays the same. The landlord doesn't say, oh, you have 1 less kid living there, will knock your rent down a little. So people should be aware of the decreases aren't as dramatic as you might anticipate.
Right. And I think it's important. There's several things in there that I want to make sure people understand. So let me go back to the guidelines for a second, because I think this is some place that people get confused because the guidelines are a product of the state legislatures, right? The legislatures get together. That means our lawmakers, and they come up essentially with this formula. And you called it the plug and output. I call it the plug and chug method, right? Yeah. You plug in numbers, which are basically income numbers, and it chugs out a child support figure.
That's right.
And the reality for most families is that figure is a function of income, not a function of what it costs to raise children.
That's right.
Right. And so that's, I think, the first frustrating aspect for many people who perhaps are not living in Fairfield County where you and I practice, where, incomes tend to be quite high. For people who are, on a paycheck to paycheck type budget or even doing better than that, it still doesn't mean that child support is a figure that's going to equate to what it costs to raise a child in that area, does it?
That's exactly right. It's probably never enough. I mean, never enough certainly is the complaint I get from a lot of the recipients of child support that it's not enough. And we hear it at all different levels, actually. Of course, it's all relative. There's also a point, though, where even though we have guidelines that numbers I talked about that extrapolate beyond, there's also a point on the other end where enough is enough. And I share a little bit of a war story. I don't like doing that all the time, but this is really applicable here. I was once before a judge, and this person had tens of more money than that person ever could have needed and had to pay child support and said to the judge, I will pay whatever you think is appropriate for me to pay. And the judge was quizzically looking at counsel and called counsel up to the bench and said, well, how much does one 14-year-old boy cost in $5,000 a month? And he said, let's settle this case. $5,000 a month is beyond what this kid can eat, be clothed in. I don't care what kind of house he lives in or she lives in. It shouldn't be, that expensive. So that judge, although it's not a law, gave us sort of a cap to say there's a point where enough's enough. Now, that was about 10 years ago, so maybe things have changed a little bit, and that judge might say a little more higher number today. But I always point at the fact that just because someone makes tons and tons of money doesn't mean the child support goes up exponentially as well.
Right. Well, and those are those cases. I've had this conversation. Actually, I just had this conversation with a client recently where when people are in these ultra high net worth income stratospheres, and we're talking, quite a bit of money, that there is a a dueling sort of concept of it shouldn't be a windfall
Exactly.
to one parent, right? That they're the parent who the children are with primarily, that they are getting a extra large amount. But you and I both know, because I know you represent clients often in those higher net worth areas, there are expenses that sometimes these families face that other families might not face. I'm just the case I'm dealing with, the security for the minor children. So meaning bodyguards, et cetera, because of the potential kidnapping threat, et cetera.
Yes.
And so they have to travel private because it's safer. I know this sounds like other people's problems and rich, but that's something that we had to bring into that conversation, right?
Yeah.
So there is some, when you get into the higher regions of income, there's more of a practical approach and need-based to it, I think.
Yep, those special needs will get looked at, which brings a common question. I have a special needs child whose expenses are in excess of what I don't like to use the word normal child, but someone who doesn't have certain specific needs. So those are issues that the child support guidelines directly may not address. However, the add-ons that I talked about a little while ago, which I want to talk more about, would address. So when it comes to covering things like unreimbursed medical expenses or needs for special needs children, tutors, those type of items, generally that'll be a function of a percentage split based on the party's incomes after the payment of alimony, for example. So it might be that it's a 60-40 split or a 50-50 split. It depends on what those numbers work out to be. For Connecticut, they can order payment of unreimbursed medical expenses, those type of insurances. They can't order the payment of extracurricular activities, though. So when it comes to, I want to be on the travel baseball team or I want to ride horses and it's $10,000 a year, the parents have to agree on that activity. In agreements where we settle cases, which happens 95+% of the time, we usually agree on what that distribution would be. Or in a high net worth case, someone might say, I'm going to pay a certain amount of child support, but I'll cover all the extras. Those are different ways to resolve those issues. But it is a little bit of a mistaken fact. People think, oh, my child is on the swim team. He should be paying for that or she should be paying for this. That has to be an agreed upon add-on. One point I want to bring out, I get asked this all the time, so I preempt it, is health insurance. Who has to pay health insurance? And how does it impact the guidelines? Well, in Connecticut and a lot of other states, when we take someone's income, we reduce it by the health insurance premiums before we plug it into the guidelines. So it really accounts for the health insurance of that child. And it's not as expensive as people think for the children. It's usually us older people that it really.
Yeah. What? Hey,
sorry, me on this side, the right side of the screen. But it certainly does come into play, and it is accounted for when dealing with issues of health insurance.
Yeah. And the health insurance and then those unreimbursed medical expenses that you were just talking about. And in fact, many states, including Connecticut, also the child support guidelines will provide for percentages of work-related childcare as well. Do you want to explain that?
Good point. Yes. So if somebody is a recipient of childcare and needs to hire a recipient of child support, or a childcare provider during work hours, that could also be divided 50-50, 60-40. It's a mandatory add-on. You can't just have someone in the house, and go out to dinner with your friends and pay for that hour that way. So work-related childcare, usually it's after school care or sometimes in the morning for care. That comes into play, and that's then a separate add-on that's payable. And a lot of times to address those things, these add-ons, if you're listening and thinking about, well, I've got all these activities and the copay and the braces and the childcare, it becomes sort of a tennis match of bills going back and forth. We avoid that a lot, and we put together a fund. And I love this. I can tell you, I know in all the years of doing this, it is probably the more foolproof way of resolving these issues. Basically, we set up a joint bank account where both parties are signatories to the account, and they can only use it to write checks or debit or credit card use. Can't take cash out of those accounts. Let's say I'll make up a number, $10,000 in the account the day of the divorce. When it gets down to $2,000, each party has to replenish it another $5,000. And each party can use that credit card and debit card to pay for things that are agreed upon. So the sign-up fee for, flag football comes in, or the copay at the doctor's office for $20 comes in. You use the credit card, debit card, and it's all online, so both people can see it. So this avoids really the horror of, I paid for this on this day, I didn't agree with that on that day. It is really one of the, 5 years after divorce, people come in with receipts, and I go, it's not worth it. It's not worth paying our fee to get you back less. So I love the idea of a fund, and I often put language in, and something really that helps is if there's a dispute in the fund, don't go back to court. Go to an arbitrator. Let somebody else determine whether you misspent the funds. And if someone misspent the funds, the loser pays the winner's fees. And I put that in there to be honest. And the best example I can provide is, so I'm in the Northeast, so there's a lot of skiing that goes on up here. And if your child's going on a YMCA ski trip and it's a $150 fee, pay for it out of the fund. But if you're taking your child skiing, you can't use the fund to pay for the lift ticket and the lessons and the rentals. So that's the differentiation between what you're doing with your child versus what an individual activity would be outside of your, purview for the child.
That's such a good point. And I'm so glad you raised the idea of this children's account or children's fund. It has saved so many families so much. I mean, just the accounting of who paid for what when they had to go back and forth. And I mean, it's just go back, everyone, and listen to the Nightmare of Shared Expenses episode with Marco from Decomply. I'll link to it in the show notes. That's going to, Eric and I have both seen him, right? The client who comes in with the box full of all the receipts with the, Excel spreadsheets over 4 years, right? Yeah. We're both getting actually like PTSD over this.
Yeah.
They're a nightmare, but it's a good point for people to understand. And I'd love to touch on this because I'm sure you have a way of talking to your clients about this. As you said, in Connecticut and in many states, extracurricular activities. So all the things that your children enjoy, their sports, their all the things, the trips, the school events, those cost money. It costs real money for your kids to participate in that. That is not generally what child support is for. And since it can't be court ordered, it means that you and your ex, your co-parent, are left in this limbo in some ways of having to come to agreements on this on an ongoing basis. And unfortunately, and I know there's a tension between cost and what kids want to do, but the kids are the ones who get caught up in the middle of all this. Right? So how do you talk to your clients about this?
I always say less communication post-divorce about financial issues is best. So what this does is it eliminates the trading of receipts. And really, it puts the focus on the child and what he or she wants to do. Now, if there's a difference between, I want my child to play on the, basketball team at the rec center that plays on Tuesdays versus I want him to play on the AAU team that plays, 9 days a week and travels over the place, that's a little bit different. But when it comes to paying for those activities, the reason less communication is better is you're only going to argue over it. I didn't agree to that. I only agreed to this type of baseball bat, not that type of bat. These are calls you get from people, which I did not go to law school to fight over sports equipment and which is the appropriate sports equipment piece for a child. And this avoids that. And it also avoids the I'm mad at you for a different reason. Oh, well, she's got a boyfriend. He's taking her out on these nice trips. She doesn't need my $800 in reimbursement that I'm supposed to pay in 30 days. Let her take me to court and hire a lawyer. That type of stuff doesn't happen as much by having this fund. And the fund, everyone always asks, what happens when we're done and the children are, out of the house? Whatever's left over, you split 50-50 or stick in a college account or something.
Right. Well, and good point, right?
Yeah.
At least in Connecticut, but many states, your children will age out of child support at a certain age. Many of the states, it's 18 or graduation from high school. Unless there's other extenuating circumstances. But then you have the issues of college and the expenses of college. And I'll frankly tell you all, as the stepmom to 24-year-olds, your kids always are going to need some financial support in their lives, right? Hi, listeners. It's Susan. So I get a lot of outreach from you with a lot of questions and a lot of people who are just feeling either stuck because they don't know where to move forward next in their divorce. They don't know what professionals they should be hiring or what process they should be using to approach their divorce, or they just need some help strategizing a path forward. Well, in order to help, what I've done is I've created a strategy session with Susan. I'm offering a limited number of 1-hour strategy sessions each week. And in those, we will spend some time looking for some clarity around your situation and help in developing a plan that's going to move you and your divorce forward. So if you want to book one, go to divorcebeyond.com/strategy with Susan, and you'll get on my calendar and we'll get you moving forward. So again, that's divorcebeyond.com/strategy with Susan. Stay tuned for more from attorney Eric Broder, who breaks down all the ins and outs of child support and shares some great tips on making agreements that will keep you out of court on this issue.
You lose your job. Don't wait. Child support is only modifiable in most states, and particularly Connecticut. It's only retroactive to the day that you serve a modification of child support document. So if you lose your job January 1st, and you wait till April 1st, you're not going to get credit for those 3 months.
If you are enjoying this episode, be sure to check out last week's show with Sadie Marie, the host of Sadie's Divorced and Happy podcast, with a delicious look at your honeymoon after divorce.
Probably the biggest gift that my honeymoon stage gave to me is it showed me just how happy I could be.
And now we return to today's show.
Let me ask you a question, because I know we both see this all the time. We've been talking about child support sort of from that perspective of right now in the divorce or at the time of divorce. But we know that people's lives, I mean, often if you've got young children, child support's going to go on for years and years. People's lives don't stay static. Children's needs don't stay static, and people don't stay in the same jobs, their incomes. What happens when things change?
So child support is always modifiable as a matter of public policy. You can't, alimony, you can agree, no matter what happens, I'll pay my ex-spouse, $1,000 a month, whatever. You cannot make child support non-modifiable for the exact reason you stated. Things always change, and children's needs change. Or children could have, God help, physical and mental issues that require more attention, or the inability of a parent to work. Also, people age out. So I'm going to start with a simple age out example and work my way backwards. In Connecticut, child support is over for a child when one of two things happens. Either the child is age 18 and graduates from high school. So if the child turns 18 in April of his or her senior year, it goes through June, I guess, of senior year. Or whenever that child turns 19. So if a child turns 19 in March of or April of senior year, it ends. What that happens then is there's a step down if there's other children, which we talked about. In other states like New York, it goes to age 21, where it goes a little bit longer. Now, the first and most common question I get is, wait a minute, my 18-year-old just went off to college, but that kid is home 5 months out of the year between spring break, Christmas break, and the summer, and I'm not getting any more child support. That's right, in Connecticut, you're not. And that child is eating plenty of food and doing all the same things that child did a year earlier when he or she was a senior in high school. So that's one of the points about Connecticut that's different from our neighboring state. In New York and some other states I know of, you get a decrease in child support while that child is off in college because you're not paying for food for 7-8 months of the year and the like. In Connecticut, though, it just completely ends when that child turns 18 and graduates from high school. So it's a very big difference. The other point is someone's job changes, income changes. If there's a substantial increase or decrease, and I'm going to say what that means in Connecticut, and it's not too dissimilar in other states. It's got to be at least a 15 to 20% growth in someone's income or decrease in someone's income for it to be worthwhile to try to reduce the amount of child support or increase the amount of child support that's going to be paid. So that's sort of the magic threshold. But if one spouse is earning a lot of money, say a few $100,000 and the other spouse doesn't work, and now that other spouse is making $50,000 or $75,000, well, that represents a 20% plus change. You can then come back to seek to reduce the child support obligation. So it's always floating. One important thing I didn't mention with age that is really important to know and vastly different is when a child has special needs in Connecticut that are significant enough that that child needs really a lot of home care, for example, then child support can go to age 21. But it ends. It's over, done. I know in California, from a case I was involved in, it can go period. And
forever.
So some of the ages of special needs children, that can be a real, and it's a real burden. A 22-year-old with substantial special needs is different than a 21-year-old. And I guess the state thinks that the two parents are going to take care of that child no matter what the circumstances are after that child turns 21. That's not always the case.
No, sadly, it's not. And in fact, we have an episode coming up on divorce for parents with children with disabilities and special needs, because I'll be honest, this is a very under-recognized area, and it's something that is increasingly becoming an issue for so many families, and it's very intractable. And I don't think in all places the law has caught up, as you said.
Nope.
In Connecticut, they can extend child support to 21. California, it can go on ad infinitum if that child is alive and has those special needs or disabilities. But there's a lot more that goes into it. So stay tuned for that episode. But that's another great point that you've made, Eric, is just to point out that there are sometimes pretty big differences in what a state's laws provide for when it comes to parents' responsibilities and obligations to their children. And the one I wanted to point out, because you said, in Connecticut, you won't get any more child support once your children age out of child support at 18, 19, graduation from high school, that whole description you gave. Whereas in other states, it can be extended, like New York. But flip side of that, Connecticut does allow the court to make orders about the cost of college, and states like California, where I practice, once kids age out of child support, there's no ability of the court to order any of the expenses of college. So it's a little up in the air all the way around, right?
Yeah, Connecticut, unlike other states, allows the courts to order the parties to pay up to the cost of University of Connecticut in Stores, its main campus, which is around $35,000 a year in state tuition now. The court will look at their then existing or the financial circumstances at the time. So if you have an 8-year-old, you might not decide now who's going to pay what. And if you can't figure it out when that child's 17, you come back to court, and the court can say, all right, mom pays $15,000, dad pays $10,000, and the child gets loans for the rest, right? Or they split the first $35,000, and that's it. I think some of the tendency is, if dad were paying child support of $1,000 a month, he doesn't have to pay now. Well, that's $12,000 a year he has free to pay towards college the following year. It all sounds great if the child goes to UConn, but when the child gets into, we have Yale here, which is, $80,000 a year, the court can still only order up to $35,000 of that amount. And a lot of these things, though, just to put it in perspective, when we resolve cases, and you do more than anyone, we start taking these items like college, extracurricular activities, unreimbursed medical expenses, and sometimes we kind of parse them out and give somebody a little more responsibility. Sometimes someone it's a little easier to swallow me paying for college or me paying for sports or activities versus giving him or her more money, right? So at the end of the day, everyone benefits the same. If I pay Susan, $1,000 a month, but instead of doing that, I pay $12,000 a year of all of the kids' activities, there's no difference between giving you the money, and if I did the math right, and you paying half, or maybe it was 24, but of you paying half of those expenses. So we utilize those in a way to be creative in settling cases. There's also end dates, right? Certain activities, there might be travel soccer, and then that ends once a kid's in high school, or decreases because they're in the high school season, and it's less expensive to play a high school sport than all these premier level sports. So things that way, it's a little more understandable and someone easier to swallow, paying kids' expenses maybe than paying an ex-spouse who you're angry.
Yeah. Well, and there's something I want to point out here in just what you said there. There's a huge benefit to clients of having an attorney like Eric who deals with negotiating these issues all the time, right? And these issues for children, and has that ability to know creatively how to make these, negotiated agreements work for everyone. Because as he said, most cases settle, more than 95% do. But when you have an attorney who knows how to be creative and get that job done and knows the issues they're dealing with, I think you just saw what that looks like as Eric was explaining that.
It makes it a lot easier. And by the way, for the recipient in that example, to know that I don't have to write a check in January for this activity or March or an unexpected check, it gives you more predictability on how to manage your finances too, because you're not worried about making all those expenses. So yes, we always try to be creative and look at the benefit to both sides, frankly, of doing that.
I love it because it's kind of a mediation mindset, right? Finding the third way, not the you win or you win, but that's we both win kind of approach. And that's, who won in all that, I have to say, who wins is the kids. Yeah. The kids. They get to do their activities. Mom and dad, or mom and dad know how these things are going to be paid for. And I suspect something else that you do, Eric, when you negotiate, settlements and divorce agreements, is sort of talk about things that parents can pre-agree to, like activities. Yes. We know that Billy is a hockey prodigy and that it's likely he may want to do travel hockey, which, as we both know, costs $15,000, $20,000 a year. Right. So you can talk about some of those things ahead of time and put that right in your agreement, right? Exactly. And we do that a lot. It avoids a fight later, especially with educational issues, whether it be, college prep, tests, SAT, ACTs, or tutors. We build that right in there. Now, there are issues where people can't afford those things, right? So it's a matter of how do we budget these things out? Sometimes we'll put maximum amounts or minimum amounts that you can agree on, or just to avoid somebody. I'll agree to ice hockey, right? Ice hockey can be exponentially expensive, and we want to make sure that maybe someone limits the amount of responsibility they have for an activity if they can't afford it. So we'll get into the budgeting as well. Now, I can't let you go without asking you for a little insight on the impact of the amount of time the children are with each parent has on child support. And I know this varies widely by state, but I'd love to get just a little layer of information in here about timeshare and its impact. So one of the deviation criteria, how you can go off what the guidelines say, the amount, to reduce the amount, is if it's a 50-50 parent. It doesn't automatically say I don't have to pay child support. Now, if two people are earning exactly the same amount of money or within close range, it's probably going to be no child support. Just because someone earns a lot more doesn't mean that the person earning less or not working doesn't get child support if it's 50-50. It just might not be the presumptive amount that the guideline spits out, as we talked about before. I'm finding more and more that since COVID, particularly where parents have the ability more often to work from home where they didn't, and judges tend to be looking, hey, if a kid can be with both parents equally, why not? It's impacting the amount of child support that somebody is paying because now they have the child 50% of the time versus maybe 30 or 40% of the time. To the contrary, people think, well, my spouse doesn't have our child or our children at all, works all week, gets the children maybe every other Friday to Sunday. That's a minuscule amount of time. I should get more, but it doesn't really work that way. For whatever reason, it doesn't. There's no magic number of days. And but I always get I'm not going to pay child support because I have the kids half the time. And that's not true if indeed your income is unbalanced from the recipient. Right. And that's a good point. And I do want to say for our listeners who are in states like California, where as a part of the plug and chug formula we were talking about, the percentages of parenting time go right into the formula. Yep. That's about half our states. That's going to affect, those percentages will affect the final numbers that come out in the bottom, essentially the same way Eric's talking about, but in Connecticut and states that don't put the percentages into the guidelines, it's a further calculation. In California and those states, it's a part of the calculation. But I do want to say, and I say this to clients all the time, I'm wondering if you do, do not let your issues over paying child support and the amount of child support affect your discussion about what's best for your children in timeshare? Because frankly, the percentages don't result in huge swings in child support, do they?
Not at all. I mean, can't tell you the exact numbers, but someone's income or time fluctuating $20,000, $30,000 a year, if it knocks it $70, $80 a month, I'd be surprised, or $100 a month. And at the end of the day, don't spend, the tens of thousands of dollars fighting on an issue that's going to win you $1,200 a year. I mean, it's silly. The numbers are really compact within the child support guidelines, especially the more you make, the more compact they are. So don't fight about it. But it leads me to one thing, which is maybe sort of the end of child support in a sense, is enforcement. And I can tell you that there's one knock on judges. They don't, I say, punish people for failing to provide documents in divorce cases, missing a lot of dates and being late with discovery. But I can tell you when it comes to child support, judges take it really seriously. Don't play games. Pay your child support on time, no matter what. I've seen, the proverbial toothbrush being held up in court by judges sometimes when someone screws around and doesn't pay child support. If you can't afford to pay child support, you lose your job. Don't wait. Child support is only modifiable in most states, and particularly Connecticut. It's only retroactive to the day that you serve a modification of child support document. So if you lose your job January 1st and you wait till April 1st, you're not going to get credit for those 3 months. And not only is that arrearage going to increase, but it's going to increase with interest, and it never goes away. If you file for bankruptcy, child support obligations don't go away. There are people, you hear about it and people laugh. They say, I'm paying child support for my 40-year-old. Well, that's because when your 40-year-old was 12, you didn't pay child support.
Right.
They stopped paying. Right. And they had to chase you. And if you can't afford to pay child support, file that motion. And the trick is this. This is what a judge is going to want to look for. Did that person try to find employment consistent with their prior employment that they lost? So there are judges that hand out sheets that say name of date of interview.
Job search.
Yeah.
Yep.
Show me your job search. It's a form. I tell people to save every email, every resume they posted on Indeed or Monster or whatever it is, because you've got to show the judge that you made a real effort, not just a nice try effort, but when it comes to child support, a real effort to find employment. So judges take that probably more seriously, definitely than anything else on the financial side of things. Child support enforcement. In fact, we have a division in Connecticut that handles child, as do a lot of states.
One thing with child support too is it never offset it against something else. Because we see people do this all the time where they owe $300 that week in child support, but the other person owes them $50, so they only pay $250. Do not offset your child support payments. Always make sure it's in the full and complete amount, and do the $50 reimbursement separately, because far too much time has been spent in court trying to figure those things out. But and your other point is important as well, because it's the majority of states, I believe, have that same rule. Yeah. Is that you can only be retroactive on a request to reduce your child support and your alimony in many states to the date that you basically give notice to the other party legally that you're seeking that downward modification. So if you're not understanding what we're saying, reach out to Eric, reach out to your local attorney to get information on that, because that is a very critical part if you've lost your job or your income has gone down precipitously, which has been happening. I mean, we're going into unfortunately, it looks like another recession. So we're going to see this for people.
And don't be late. There's no excuse anymore. I still hear some people say it was postmarked. I'm like, what year are we in?
The check is in the mail.
That doesn't work, okay? There's direct deposit, wire transfer, direct deposit, Venmo.
Carrier pigeon, just pay your child support.
But just set your bank account for the first of the month for whatever the amount, for $1,000 a month, and boom, that's it, and make it go, because no one's going to buy that excuse. Yeah. A lot of those 20-year-ago arguments that I remember, bringing the envelopes to court and showing the judge the postmark that the 8th, it was due on the 1st. We don't get to do that anymore.
I'm even older than you, so I remember. I remember all of this. Do you remember being in the hallway with a calculator and a pencil trying to do the child support guidelines that way on a bench? Yeah.
Now it's an app.
Yeah, thank God now, everyone, we do these things. Yeah, so we do them on our phones. Well, exactly. Eric, that is so much fantastic information for my listeners on such a, confusing topic. We realize that this can be, very hard and confusing for people, but that was a wonderful, layer of information. If people want to know more, if they're in Connecticut, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, they can simply call our office. It's on our website, the 203-222-4949. We're always happy to help take calls. Or email's even great because we can set up a time to talk about a quick question or something if it's on, the guidelines or anything. And if it's another state, I have a lot of, referral sources in other states. I'm happy to pass on if I can be of assistance that way. I can't speak to other states specifically, of course, as Connecticut, but I definitely have some general knowledge and understanding. So thank you.
Yeah. No, well, thank you for joining us. I'm going to have you back on in 2023 we'll come up with another fun topic. I'm actually thinking, just so you can start thinking of your stories.
All right.
I'm going to do dating advice from divorce attorneys is going to be the next compilation episode. So you can start thinking of your best relationship advice after having been a top divorce attorney for so many years.
I can do more of the don'ts than the do's for sure.
Yeah, well, don'ts are just as good as do's.
Yep, exactly. So gladly. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you so much, Eric. Thank you for joining me today on the Divorce and Beyond podcast. I hope you found some information and inspiration to help you on this journey. Please join me every Monday at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for a new episode. And if you like the show, please take the time to subscribe and leave me a 5-star review on iTunes. You can also find more information on the website at divorceandbeyondpod.com, where you'll find links to the YouTube channel, transcripts of the episodes, and other bonus content. So I'll see you next week to help you move through your divorce and beyond.